In order to understand the geography of Europe, you really have to understand what a peninsula is. And so that's a word we're going to introduce right now. A peninsula is a chunk of land, kind of jutting off a larger piece of land that has water on three sides. So we know an island has water on all four sides, but a peninsula is only connected to land on one side. It has water on three different sides. So Europe is essentially a giant peninsula that over here in this area is attached to Asia. Okay, and it's attached to a huge landmass of Asia, but it's sticking out and there's water on all three sides. Okay, so that is, or all of Europe is one big peninsula. And then this peninsula has a ton of peninsulas on it. If we just start to identify some of these peninsulas, we can see up here, there's a Scandinavian peninsula. Right here, Denmark is a peninsula. Right here, we've got the Iberian Peninsula, we've got the Italian Peninsula, we've got all kinds of different peninsulas. Even down here, the Aegean, okay? There's just a ton of different peninsulas. And so, like I said, just a couple of the examples were this Scandinavian peninsula, which we're going to look at on the next map and identify, and then the Italian peninsula, which is Italy down here, looks kind of like a high-heeled boot. Here's the heel, and here's the toe of the boot. Okay, and then the Iberian Peninsula last is this one out here with Spain and Portugal. But again, we'll look at that on the next slide and see what it is. But over the course of this giant peninsula, there are about three different landforms. And the three landforms are the plains, which are mostly seen up in this top region. And then we've got the uplands, which are kind of like plateaus and stuff as you start to move into the mountains. And then there's big mountain chains around on the bottom part, as well as over here and down here. So we see a lot of flat plains, elevated plateaus, and mountains in Western Europe. And so now for our potential quiz slash test question, we've got to identify this map and start to put in our physical features that we're going to learn about Europe. And so let's quickly start putting these in. I'm just going to put the numbers on where they go and kind of explain what they are. You can see all of them are spelled out nicely for you here, and you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 if you want to pause it, and then you can just put the numbers on the map as you go, as I explain them. So number one is the British Isles. The British Isles right here. The British Isles include both of these islands right here. Okay, it's United Kingdom and Ireland. So that is number one, those two big islands that we will talk about a lot throughout this unit. Next is the Scandinavian Peninsula. Scandinavian Peninsula is this northern part. It's Norway and Sweden. So I'm going to circle it here, and then I'll put my number 2 right there. The Scandinavian Peninsula all the way in the north part. The third one is the Iberian Peninsula. I explained this before, but the Iberian Peninsula has both Spain and Portugal on it. It's way down in the southwest corner of this map. So you can see the Iberian Peninsula there. The Italian Peninsula is next, and that's Italy. Italy is this country right down here. It is the Italian Peninsula. That is number 4. So number 4 right there. And so now we've done kind of the islands and the peninsulas, so I'm just going to quickly change the color so that you can know that these are kind of different things, and we'll move on to talking about the mountains, and I'll do the mountains in red. I'll draw them in, and then I'll put the number next to them. The first one is the biggest set of mountains. Number 5 is the Alps. And the Alps are all through this region. This entire orange part is all Alps, 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 Alps. Very, very big mountain chain. It's one of the largest ones in the area. So that is number 5, the Alps right there. And then the next one is the Pyrenees. The Pyrenees is what separates the Iberian Peninsula in Spain from the rest of Europe. So that's number 6 right down here. Again, in the southwest corner, you can see that little line of mountains that I drew in. Next is the Apennines Mountain. The Apennines Mountain just run like a spine right down the middle of Italy. So if you can look down at Italy right now, I'm drawing in the mountains, and then that is where number 7 goes. The mountains just down the spine of Italy. And then the Mediterranean Sea. We'll switch over to a different color. Let's switch to we'll do dark blue for the next 3 because they're kind of big region things. And the Mediterranean Sea is this body of water that's just south of all of this. So the Mediterranean Sea is this giant body of water, number 8, that's found at the bottom of the map, under all the land. And then the northern European plain is next, and you can see it on this map. It's really this big green area all the way down through here is going to be number 9. That's a big flat land area that we'll talk about a lot. And then the central uplands, kind of the hardest one to fit in there because it's between the northern European plain and the Alps. So it's kind of this yellow region all through here, and you can call that number 10. So as long as you know that 9 is on top of 10, you'll be able to identify these on a map. Now we're going to talk about some of the regions. First off is the Northern European Plains. The Northern European Plains is that area all along the very north coast of Europe that goes all the way from the western part of France all the way out to Russia. It's one of the largest consecutive areas of flat land on the entire earth, and because of this, farming has been really pretty easy for these people, and they've been able to make the resources that they need, and so it's a reason for Europe having so much wealth and so many people living in it. The next one we'll talk about is the central uplands, and the central uplands are kind of that transition from the northern European plains up into the mountains, and so the central uplands has kind of some of the mountains, some of the smaller mountains as they're getting closer to the Alps, but then also many of the plateaus, the flat-topped areas with sheer cliffs on them as well, are found in that central uplands area. And then the Alps are the last one, and the Alps are the largest mountain chain in the entire southern mainland, the entire part of Europe there, and this mountain chain has these streams that are created by glaciers that slide off of the mountain, and these streams, as these glaciers start to slide down and then melt, feed into and create the 2 main rivers of the area, the Rhine and the Danube River. And then those rivers eventually make their way into the major sea of the region, and the major sea of the region is the Mediterranean Sea. Very beautiful, nice weather there all the time. You can see it down here in this picture on the bottom. And essentially, the Mediterranean Sea allows Europe to be completely surrounded by water, which allows Europe to maintain a temperate climate. Remember, a temperate climate, meaning that it never gets real hot, never gets real cold, because the water around it regulates its temperature. If it gets super hot, water makes it cooler. If it gets super cold, water makes it warmer. And so it not only does that, but it also is an important part of the trade axis. I won't ask you to write anything down for this checkpoint, but it would be a good idea to look over this map and try to identify as many of, kind of quiz yourself, try to identify as many of those 10 physical features as you possibly can and where they're located, and then you can look back to slide 2 to check your answers. As far as climates and the ecosystem within them, they're really, in Europe, mainly mild climates. Most of the countries are pretty close to the Atlantic Ocean or close to the Mediterranean Sea or close to some of that. And so the breezes bring in the warm air off of the ocean. And like I said, it moderates the temperatures. It keeps it from getting too cold. It keeps it from getting too hot. Now, at one point in ancient Europe was covered by forests. It had forests over almost all of it. But over time, with all the people that have lived in Europe and how dense the population is, they've cleared a lot of these forests for cities and farms and factories. And so now much of the forests in Europe are gone. However, one of their major natural resources is kind of a weird one when we think about it, because we've talked about gold and diamonds and bauxite and oils and all that kind of stuff. But one of their most important natural resources is loss. And loss is this word right here. I know it looks like Loess or Los or something like that, but the way you say it is loss. And loss is a rich black soil that was left behind by the glaciers. So all the things that died and decayed and left their nutrients all kind of stuck in that glacier. And as the glaciers melted when the ice age went away and they started to recede, this loss was left behind, and the winds over many hundreds of years started to blow out and move this loss around and cover the entire northern European plain with it. And so, of course, this makes it a great land for, great land for like growing crops and raising animals and all these different things, which allowed the population of Europe to get bigger, and it allowed Europe to become a richer and richer continent. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is tundra and taiga. We've talked about tundra before. Tundra is very cold. It's cold most of the year, frozen most of the year. They have permafrost. But the things that grow there are like grasses and mosses and herbs and shrubs and things with very shallow root systems that can grow, and then they end up dying off, and then they grow, and then they end up dying off. But underneath all of this, or the soil where they can actually grow, is this land that's always frozen, and so the roots can't ever get down in there, and so there's really no trees. Tundra is too cold for trees to grow there. However, the next step down, the next step closer, is the taiga ecosystem. And the taiga ecosystem, here's a picture of it right here. Here's how you say that, how you spell it, and it is essentially just a really thick forest of coniferous trees, so like pine trees, any tree that has cones and needles instead of leaves and seeds. And so this thick forest of coniferous trees is just below that tundra, and it's mostly in Scandinavia and the other parts of northern Europe, the northernmost parts of it. In Europe, there's many different people. It's very diverse, but it's what's common about it, what's everywhere, is a really good education system, and the really good education they have creates a higher standard of living. If we look across Europe and we look at literacy rates, almost all of the people in Europe that are of that age can read and write. The other thing to talk about is what languages do they read and write in? Well, if you look at most of Europe, about half of the people speak English. They also speak their native languages, the languages in their country. So like in France, they would speak French as well. In Italy, they'd speak Italian. In Spain, Spanish. In Portugal, Portuguese. Okay, they would speak those as well, but about half of them speak English as well. And like I said, many of the people know multiple languages, but the other half only speak their native languages. And so there's many languages, at least one per country, really. Okay, sometimes there are multiple ones in each one of these European countries. Now, with the diversity of language, the cool thing about it is it can really unite some cultures. And so these European countries have gone out and they've taken over all these different countries and parts of North Africa, like Morocco, for instance. Those people, if they want to leave there, they can go to France and they already speak the language because they speak French in Morocco. And so they're already able to jump into the culture of France a lot quicker than if they were immigrating to a place that they didn't know the language. There are also, outside of languages, very diverse amount of religions, many different religions. For the past 2,000 years, Christianity has been the main religion in Europe, and it still remains the main religion in Europe. There's always been a strong Jewish population in Europe as well, but it's become an immigrant destination, and since it's become an immigrant destination, people are bringing their religions with that. They're not changing their religion as they come into the countries of Europe. And so the religions and number of people in those religions are starting to grow. The other thing about the customs and about the culture is that as immigrants come into Europe, the immigrants are changing and becoming more European, but the European countries or culture is also changing and adding those little pieces of the immigrants' culture into it as well. When we look at population density, most of the people in Europe live within 100 miles of water. And, the reason they would do that is a couple of different reasons. First off, trade routes. They're able to move their goods from one place to another very efficiently because water is the best way to do that. But also, they in the northern part, they live by water because of the milder weather. You want to be close to the ocean so it's not really freezing and a bad place to live. The good thing about southern and central Europe is that it's a little bit warmer because it's way down south here. And so you can kind of see down in this region that I just circled, those colors are a little more spread out. The people are a little more spread out. Whereas right here, it's all by one or two rivers. And then right here, we're really close to the sea as well. In the southern part, it's not such a big deal because the climate is a lot nicer. It's a lot more, mild absolutely everywhere. And so, that temperate climate allows them to spread out a little bit more, a little further away from the water, especially with modern technology and the ability to move goods in a more efficient way. Many of the people, or however, many people in one region also creates a lot of pollution. And so there's a few different issues with pollution. First off, climate change. We know about global warming. We know about carbon dioxide being put into our atmosphere and warming up the entire earth, and the problems that we've talked about many times. Another problem is acid rain. And what happens with acid rain is the air pollution goes up into the air, gets up in the clouds, and it attaches itself to raindrops. Those raindrops fall down and they're slightly acidic, not enough to burn your skin or anything like that, but enough that when it happens over and over and over again, it can destroy monuments. It can kind of start to melt the fine features off of statues that were built out of stone. And it can also kind of entirely ruin lakes and forests and all that kind of stuff. As the lakes get more acidic, or that acid rain starts to eat away at those trees and destroys them and kills them. Now, the other thing that happens is chemical spills, and there are bad chemical spills. Sometimes they happen from factories, which cause huge amounts of water pollution. Many rivers have been shut down because of a bad chemical spill, to the point where even fish wouldn't want to swim in there, even fish wouldn't want to live in there, and so they don't go into that river for a period of time while it's being cleaned up. Europe is known as the urban continent, and it's known as the urban continent because most people live in the cities. As a matter of fact, in the United Kingdom, about 90% of the people live in cities. There's not very many people living out in the country. Most of the countries, however, also limit how big the cities can be. And so instead of growing out, they don't let them get any bigger in square miles. They have to build the buildings higher. And so those countries get really packed. Those cities get really packed with people. And there's not very many people that can afford to have a single family home, just a normal home with a yard and all that kind of stuff. Most of the people in Europe have to live in big apartment buildings and have shared spaces and parks and stuff like that. And that's because there's so many people in such a small space in Europe that they need to leave some of that land so that they can have food, they can grow things on farms, so that they can have forests and maintain that for an air filter, and then also to have recreation, have fun areas where they can hike and see nature. Last of all, one of the important things with these big cities is they've set up really big public transportation systems. And all across Europe, there's trains and subways and all that kind of stuff that people can use. And not only can people use them, but people do use them all the time because Europe has put together a high tax on gasoline. And so oftentimes it costs about 2 times as much per gallon of gas to buy it in Europe as it does in the United States. So if it's $2 here, it would be $4 a gallon there, which is a whole lot more money when you think about it in terms of 15 gallons needed. That's an extra $30 every time you fill up your tank.